Welcome to our postponed webinar workshop. And this is the final edition of our spring developing research skills workshop series. So thanks to you, excuse me, for joining us either live or if you're watching this on YouTube, welcome. We're very excited to be able to offer today's workshop on scientific writing. It's one of our most requested topics, and we're very excited to have a returnee presenter, Shannon Lynch, who also did her undergraduate work at UAB. But before we get to her, I just also want to introduce and give a quick shout out and option to introduce our wonderful presenter, Haley Levi, who is one of the two master's students who are helping us offer this series. They've done a wonderful job along with Keegan Curry of finding us presenters and then scheduling this thing. So I just want to thank you again, Haley. And if you want to just do a quick introduction for Shannon, we'll get started.
Sure. Hey, Haley.
Sorry, there was something.
Oh, you're fine.
Hi. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our last workshop today. This is a very near and dear friend of mine, Shannon. Shannon is a UAB graduate student in the biomedical science program in the cell molecular developmental biology thing. So she is a fellow graduate student. She has done a lot of writing. She is fantastic at it, and I am extremely ecstatic to have her bring us this workshop today. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Gareth and Haley, for that warm introduction. I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you all about scientific writing. And I hope that this will either answer some of your questions that you have about scientific writing, or maybe just teach you some things generally about scientific writing and what that looks like. So without further ado, we will get started. Or we won't. There we go. All right, so before we begin, I just kind of want to lay out the format of today's presentation and the topics that we're going to be discussing. So we will talk about the format of papers, some strategies for writing and citing in papers, some resources to improve your writing. Maybe you're not the best writer, you're not the most experienced, some ways to improve that. And then we'll discuss authorship and then what the revision process looks like, both before submission and then after submission into publication. So before I actually get into my presentation, I wanted to just kind of give a little bit of a plug to some of the past seminar series that have been held here. So specifically the scientific literacy seminar, I think will be really useful to you to either watch before or after this presentation. It discusses the way to read a scientific paper and how to comprehend writing. And I think that will be really useful in understanding the topics. And then also, if you know how to read a paper, it'll make writing potentially a little bit easier. So now I'm going to discuss some examples of scientific or academic writing that maybe you guys have seen as undergrads through your courses or maybe just in your free time. So some of those things might be a capstone course. So typically, for a capstone, you might be writing a paper yourself, or you'll be using peer review publications or scientific articles, or maybe a textbook references, some type of scientific writing. So this type of writing can be seen in many different places, and hopefully you have seen some examples of that at this point. If not, the internet is a great place to start searching and looking around for other examples of academic and scientific writing. And then generally, the purpose of academic or scientific writing is to communicate something. So you have all these things that you found out, or all these experiments maybe you've done, and you have these observations, and you want to communicate that, whether it be to scientists or the lay community. The goal is to communicate something, tell why it's important in a clear and concise manner, and to make sure that you have accurate representations of whatever your findings may be. So now let's talk about the format of a scientific and academic paper. So some people say that there's a little bit of a difference between scientific and academic writing. Typically, academic papers use the MLA format, And this is commonly seen or used in humanities type research. So something such as literature, maybe even education research, anthropology, history, etc. These are all examples of academic paper formatting. So typically use MLA, maybe a little bit of variation in there. In contrast, scientific papers typically use the AMA format. So this is a little bit more standardized throughout every field of science. And these are typically used in what people consider hard sciences, which is debated a little bit, but things like chemistry, physics, and biology use the AMA format in publications. And probably the most stark difference between scientific and academic paper formats is this thing called the IMRAD. So maybe you've heard of this in one of your classes before. If not, I'm going to break it down for you and tell you a little bit more details about the IMRAD layout. So what even is the IMRAD, right? So IMRAD stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. So these are standard sections of a scientific paper. You have to have all 4 of these sections in addition maybe to some other sections. Whereas in academic writing, it's possible to have the IMRAD format, but a lot of times papers in the academic sense will vary a lot from this, and they won't necessarily use the formal headings, introduction, methods, results. They might have a more explanatory heading or summary of whatever the section is discussing. So again, let's talk more about the IMRAD structure of a scientific paper. So for the introduction, this is the introductory paragraph of a paper, and this can actually be multiple sections depending on how complex your topic is or how well known it is. So this section, the purpose of it is to provide background information about your topic. So let's say you're talking about cardiovascular disease. This will be all the sections about what is cardiovascular disease, why is it important, and discuss the overall goals of the authors and what they want to achieve in this paper. Then we get to the methods section. So the methods section is a very detailed section regarding how the data was actually collected. Maybe what experiments did they perform and how did they do them? So some other examples are number and demographics of participants. So if you're doing a clinical study, this might be important data for you to know. And then if you're more of a wet lab scientist, maybe you want to know what reagents they used or what expression markers specifically they looked at. And this method section is really important for reproducibility. Showing your methods means that other scientists can replicate the work that you've done, or other researchers can replicate the type of study you have done and really verify that your results are truly what you saw and not as a result of confounding factors. Then we get to the results section of the IMRAD structured scientific paper. So this is typically where you will see figures and tables. Each of these figures will show all of the data that they collected. And then typically there will be a figure legend or a table legend describing specific parts about the figure. So you may say, in figure 1A, they're showing you a histogram plot of their flow cytometry data, for example. So results is a very important section and typically where all the data can be found. And then we get to the last section that is mandatory for scientific papers, the discussion portion. So in the discussion portion, the authors will address any significant findings that they have. So from the results in the figures that they showed and the data they collected, what were the most striking things that we saw? And then they might also talk about the limitations of their study. So if you did a study in mice, for example, but you're studying a human disease, this could potentially be a limitation. Although, yes, you want to start with a model animal, it is, in contrast, not actually the thing that you want to be studying. But we don't really do research in humans, right? So now let's talk about the other sections that you might see in a scientific paper. So namely the abstract. This is something that will be seen in pretty much every paper across scientific and academic communities. This abstract is a really short summary of the entire paper. essentially what I refer to as the elevator pitch. It tells you everything that you need to know about the paper, the most important parts, the highlights, in around 250 words. So you only have 250 words to say the most important things. That's what the abstract is for. Some other sections that you might see are the analysis sections. However, this is sometimes redundant to the results and discussion sections. So really depending on the journal or the author's style, there may or may not be an analysis section. Another section is the conclusions. So this is also really similar to the discussion or results. And sometimes they'll combine sections just for brevity's sake. So this is an optional section as well. And then you have supplemental figures or information. So this may actually be a limitation due to the journal and not actually something the authors have decided upon. So really big name journals, for example, Nature, has a limitation on the number of figures that you can actually publish in their journal. So for this reason, a lot of their data and figures will end up in the supplemental figures. That doesn't mean it's less important. That just means the journal restricts you to only having 2 or 3 figures. So you have to put more information into the supplemental. In addition, you will have an acknowledgements section, collaborations, and author contributions. So the acknowledgements and collaboration section is really just to say thank you to the people who assisted you in your study and your research. Specifically, if you have collaborators, maybe you're working with someone in a different country and you want to say thank you to them, because I'm sure that that is a difficult process in itself. And then author contributions basically tells you what each author of the paper contributed to the work. And this is really important when we get to talking about authorship, which I will discuss further. Another section that you will see is the funding sources. This is very important because without money, none of the research would happen, right? So you have to acknowledge your funding sources, something like the NIH, maybe you have a grant through them. It's really important to acknowledge your funding sources. And then lastly, you will have a reference section. Any paper, academic or scientific, will have references. Even in your own writing, maybe for class, you will have a references section more than likely. So now we finished talking about the format of a paper. Let's talk about how you actually write it. So here are some strategies that I personally have for writing, and this will vary a little bit depending on what the purpose of your writing is for. If it's for class or if it's for publication, they might be a little bit different. But my initial point is to say, do some background research, especially if it's for a class. You probably don't know that much about the topic. And even if you think you know a lot about the topic, I promise you there is always something more to learn about whatever the topic may be. So not only will you learn more about the topic, doing some background research will actually help you generate ideas and help you summarize what data actually currently exists in that field, and may even be useful in identifying holes in the field and maybe give you an idea for a new research idea. Another strategy is to make a concept map or outline. And I know this is super basic, but it can be so helpful to visually see your thoughts on paper or on the computer or wherever you're doing this concept map or outline. And it can also help you structure your paper. And then for people who don't really love organization, and maybe they're a little bit more sporadic in their thought process, there's another method where you can set a timer and just free write about the topic. This is normally something I feel like you have to know a lot about the topic before you actually can just free write like that. But if you have so many ideas about this topic and you just can't decide on where to start, just free write, set a timer for maybe 30 minutes and write everything you can about the topic. And then you can go back later and create sections and kind of form an outline or concept map based on the free write. And my biggest tip is to find a strategy that works for you personally. Everyone is different. Everyone has a different way of writing or a different method that works better for them. So if you like to free write and just set a timer and go until you can't think anymore, great. If that works not so well for you and you are really about structure and you need to see exactly, A, B, C, this is what I'm going to write when I'm going to write it. Do that. Some other little tips are to either start with the easiest or the most difficult sections to write. So sometimes it's easy to just get the simple parts out of the way. If you know it's something you feel comfortable writing about, just go ahead and do it. Or there are some people who might want to tackle the more difficult sections up front. Typically, these are more time-consuming sections, so it may be better for you to start with the hardest part, and then everything after that will be a piece of cake. Another suggestion that I have is to dedicate chunks of time to writing. So we can get really caught up specifically in wet lab doing experiments and got to move on to the next experiment, got to move on to the next experiment. But it's really, really important that you make time for your writing. So by blocking off a time on your calendar and saying, I'm going to write for 2 hours on Wednesday, it will make your life so much easier. And then you won't get to the end when you've done all the experiments for this paper. And then you're like, oh no, I have to write. So be proactive, dedicate some time to that. And then my other big tip is to take detailed notes. I know that this seems like an easy thing to do, but it's super simple to just say, oh, I'll remember that later. I promise you will not remember it later. Write it down. Write down the concentration of whatever this is. Write down the search terms that you use to generate that specific paper. This will save you so much time and backtracking when you're going to write later and you're like, oh no, I can't remember what mouse 3 was doing, etc. So now that we've talked about some strategies for writing, I want to discuss some strategies for citing. So as I stated previously, any paper you write in science or in academia generally, you will have a reference section. So my favorite software specifically is Endnote. I learned about this when I was an undergrad, and it has saved my life and my time infinitely. Like, I cannot say how great the software is. This generates the citations for you. It lets you enter it in whatever format you like. And I'll talk a little bit more about EndNote specifically upcoming. But also keep tabs on where the citations need to be inserted. So if you're typing throughout this paragraph, and maybe it's the introduction section, so you're giving background information. Well, you didn't come up with that yourself. Other people have already established this information. So you need to give credit where credit is due. So just put a little tab in there, say, this needs to be the Yamanaka paper from 2014 or something, just to remind yourself so you don't have to keep going back and checking and rereading your sections to see where you need citations. And then another tip, compile and organize your citations. You can do this based on formatting style, or maybe you use EndNote and it will just generate a giant list, a running tab of every citation you've ever used. Either way is fine, whatever works for you, again. And then another thing, you could potentially use a literature matrix or an annotated reference list. If you don't know what this is, that's okay. I will be talking about that in approximately 2 slides. And then also when you're citing in your actual body of text, make sure that you double check for plagiarism. This is a really big mistake that is easy to avoid. So if you have an annotated reference list or detailed notes about what each reference is saying, it will make it easier if you have to summarize it in your own words or paraphrase. So again, just make sure that you don't plagiarize, because this looks really bad, okay? So now we're going to talk about EndNote. So this is a free software through UAB, actually. If you're a current student, you can get this through the tech website. And again, this has saved so much time for me. I didn't know it existed. I was typing in each reference by hand. And one of the best things about EndNote is that it reformats the bibliography for you anytime you insert a citation. So if you've ever been writing before and you insert a citation at the top in your introduction, and this is citation 1, but then you find out you need a source that goes before citation 1, you don't want to have to retype and renumber every single one of your citations. This will do it for you. Not only will it reformat your entire bibliography for you, it's compatible with Word. This is super easy to translate into Word. So all you do is go into the Word text where you want to insert the citation and say insert citation, and EndNote will open and you can pick what citation you want to go in there, and then voila, you have your citations inserted in the correct format, in the right place, and it will reformat your bibliography so it doesn't make any mistakes for you. My other big reason for being a proponent of EndNote is that it's a shareable file. So you can actually share EndNote libraries with other people. So if you're working with collaborators or other people are on the same publication as you, this makes it much easier to do. And then finally, EndNote is actually a way to search databases. So you can see right here some of the databases that you can search online. So you can look for any reference that's in the Lister Hill Library, or you can search PubMed or whatever your database is. EndNote is likely compatible with it and allows you to search for a specific author, journal, etc. And with the ease of just typing it in. So EndNote, great for references and citations. So now I'm going to discuss a literature matrix. So if you don't know what a literature matrix is, it's an annotated bibliography with a summary of each source. So it has a little annotation or blurb about what each source is about. So it gives a summary so you don't have to keep rereading the sources. It'll make your life a lot easier. So through a literature matrix, you can make it as something as simple as Excel. So I'll show you one of my personal examples of a literature matrix that I used for a publication and show you just how simple it is. So through a literature matrix, you can record relevant search terms. You can record and write down what database you searched. This will make it really easy to reproduce. So again, if other scientists want to replicate your specific study and show that, these are truly your results, they can copy exactly what you did, put it into their own database, and they should be able to get the exact same results as you. And not only will it be helpful for that, it'll be helpful for you. Say you accidentally lost a source, but you have the search terms that you used and what databases you searched. All you have to do is go type in those search terms that you have in your literature matrix into the database that's also from your literature matrix, and boom, you should be able to easily find whatever article it was that you accidentally lost. In addition, you can track important publication information. So things like the author, the journal it was published in, the year that it was published in, and then maybe the PubMed ID. So if you use PubMed to search for a certain citation, you'll have it right there, which makes, again, ease of search. And then you can also keep track of specific study data. So if you want to, let's say you're doing a meta-analysis, for example, and you want to know how many male participants they had that used this drug. Well, you can go have that information in your literature matrix, so you don't have to reread the paper again. It's just right there in your own words. You can also create a link to the website or a PDF of the materials. So again, ease of use, you just click on the link and it will open the article for you if there's something maybe you decide later that you need to go back and look at. And then again, you can summarize each source so that you don't have to keep rereading all of your citations, because if you do any publications, you'll typically have a ton of sources and maybe you're not going to remember every single detail from every single source. So I highly advise using a literature matrix. And now I'm going to show you an example of my personal literature matrix. So I made this literature matrix using Excel. It's very simple. You just set up your columns across the top. So these are all the categories of information I wanted to collect from each source. And then down the left-hand paper, you can see that I have it organized by what part of the paper it's going to go in. So this is my claim 3 or my paragraph 3. And then just examples of things that you can put into your own literature matrix. You can have the date that the article was published. You can have the type of source. So maybe you want to gather a bunch of review articles, or maybe you only want to look at primary articles. This is a really great way to do that. You have the author, the DOI, the title of the article, the journal that it was published in, the purpose of the study. Here are the search terms that I used specifically to gather this information or to get this source. And then you can see I have some study design details. So you see right here, they had 7 volunteers and they gave you the age ranges and blah, blah. So now you don't have to go back and read and find all that information from the actual paper. And then I have a big summary section over here. So this is just a reference for myself. So I know this paper by Handyside looked at PGT technology, and I wanted to remember that so I can go put that in my paper. Well, easy enough right there. I can tell from the conclusion that this is the right paper, and I could maybe even find that information just from my literature matrix alone. So this is something that I really, really would advocate for you to do. And maybe this isn't your personal style or preference, but doing something similar to this, having an organizational tool will really benefit you. So now let's talk about some resources to improve your writing. Being an undergrad is hard. There may not be a ton of opportunity for you to improve your writing or scientific writing outside of a class, and that's okay. So the best ways to improve your writing are to have a plan, making a plan for your writing, and then practicing writing, which I know that doesn't sound like something you can do, but the more you write, the better you'll get at it. In addition, making a timeline of when you need to have sections completed, specifically for a publication or for a piece for class. It's really important to make a timeline of, I want to have X paragraph done 3 weeks in advance of the deadline. This will be really helpful because, again, you don't want to get to the end right up to the deadline and have to be crunching to write, because the best writing is done when it can be revised and edited. And if you only do it right before the deadline, you're not going to have a ton of time to go back and edit that. Again, using some kind of outline or a flow chart, and then going back and referencing your outline or flow chart to make sure that your writing does reflect the outline and that you are hitting the most important points that you wanted to discuss in the paper to begin with. So my biggest tip for improving your writing is to edit and revise a few separate times. And what I mean by this is to take a break. Step away from the writing, step away from the computer or the piece of paper that you're writing on, take a break, and come back later. Why I say this is that when you come back from a break and not having looked at your writing for a while, you will have a fresh perspective on the writing itself. It's really easy to read your own writing and get caught up in the cycle of reading things how you think they're written. However, when you come back from this break, you may notice some mistakes or errors, or maybe areas that you want to improve upon. This will help you, I promise. And don't feel guilty about taking a break. Everyone needs a break. Mental health. And then in addition to that, read some more literature. So let's say you're writing a paper about anthropology, okay? So if you want to write a paper about anthropology, you need to look at some anthropology literature. This will help you analyze what types of things people are writing about, not only what they're writing about, but the way in which they write about their subjects. So it'll help you learn the style of writing in this field. It will help you look at patterns and things that they're writing about. And then also more exposure to the literature will help you learn more of the vocabulary and terminology. Any specific field of study is going to have their own jargon, which can be really difficult to digest if you haven't seen it a ton before. And honestly, it's okay to Google it. If you don't know what a word means, look it up. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, the more you see the literature, the more you'll be exposed to it, the more comfortable you will be with it. And that can be really beneficial to your writing process, because the more you see the type of writing you are trying to achieve, the level that you want to be at, that will often be reflected in your own personal work. So again, I really highly recommend edit and revise and look at what else is out there. In addition, ask your friends for help, ask your peers, ask your mentors, ask your professors, ask other professionals in your field to look at your writing. Now, granted, they may say no, they may not have time, and that's okay, but at least you asked. Getting other people that are in your field or other experts in the field to look at your writing will be probably one of the most beneficial things that you can do, because they will notice and point out things to you that can really help you. And if you have a mentor specifically that works with you personally, get them to look at it because they probably know you better than anyone else. So they will know your writing style and they will know maybe more about the topic than you. So use your resources. And then something that seems really simple, and I probably shouldn't have to say this, use spell check and grammar check. I cannot tell you how many times there have been publications or papers that I've been reading and we just kind of laugh because there are simple spelling errors or grammar issues that could easily be avoided by asking other people to reread your work. And then also, if you're using Word or another software like that, they typically have a spell check function. So avoid the simple errors, do the simple things. And then if you have the ability, specifically if this is for a class, if you have the ability, run it through a plagiarism checker. So I think Chegg and EasyBib have free softwares, but there may be ones you can buy somewhere else just to make sure, especially if it's for a class, you definitely do not want to get dinged for plagiarizing. And that also goes back to my point of if you have to summarize and paraphrase, do it. And then my last resource to improve your writing is UAB's University Writing Center. So this is a great place to go. These people are literally here to help you and your writing and improve your skills. So they offer workshops and tutoring sessions, 25 or 50-minute sessions. So I highly advise you use your resources, the Writing Center, your friends, your mentors, other professionals, and then use the technology that you have, right? Spell check. As simple as that. So now we're going to discuss authorship. So what is authorship, you might ask? So I'm using a personal example to show you the 3 different types of authors that you will see on a scientific publication. So on the left right here, you can see the first author. It's very indicative. They are the first author on the author byline. Then you have the final author. This is the last author on the author byline. And then everyone else in between the first and final author is what's called a middle author. So what does that even mean? What do those phrases mean? So each type of author has its own designation, and this is a reflection of the work that was done and put into this manuscript. So the first author is typically the person who contributes the most effort to either the data collection, the analysis, the writing. They probably do the most work, which is why they have earned the title of first author. The final author is typically a more senior person. Maybe they are the mentor of the first author. They are really crucial for assisting with writing and revising, and they also probably helped plan the experimental design or how to ask questions or ways to improve the data collection. And they also might be responsible for the funding of the manuscript or the publication, or the data that was collected was through a grant that was under this final author. And then we'll talk about middle authors. So these people are just as important. However, they may not have contributed as much as the first author to the manuscript. So they are probably people who helped you with experiments. They probably helped you analyze the data, or maybe gave you some reagents here or there, or maybe they provided some insight and said, hey, maybe you should change this in your experimental design. So these people are just as important to getting the manuscript out. However, they probably just didn't put in as much work as some of the other people. So my last point before moving on from this slide is that authorship is super, super important, okay? Authorship is important because publications are essentially currency in academia, okay? So the more publications you have, the more notoriety you have, or the more well-known you are to other people in your field. Not only that, but depending on what field you're going into, they may require you to have X number of publications, or they may say, hey, we think you're a great researcher, but you don't have enough publications. So just something I want you to be aware of, publications are extremely, extremely important. So there may be a little bit of tension surrounding authorship of whatever manuscripts you're on. So I highly recommend that you discuss authorship with whomever you're working with. If you're working with a team of people, discuss, who you guys think has put in the most work, who deserves to be first author, who is the final author, where do the middle authors fall, and is there a specific order of them? And hopefully, because you're an undergrad, your mentor will have this conversation with you, and avoid some issues that could arise if you don't discuss authorship and maybe you think your name has been misplaced on the author byline, okay? So talk about authorship early and often when you're making a manuscript. So now we're going to talk about the revision process. So prior to submission of your manuscript to a journal, you're going to have to actually write the paper, right? And maybe in order to do this, you will be working with a team. So when I was an undergrad, I had one specific research project I was working on. We had a huge team of people. Approximately 20 people were conducting this research, and about 5 or 6 of us were actually writing the physical manuscript together. So in order to do this, you have to have a time to meet. Organizing schedules of 6 people sounds really difficult, and it is. So in order to do that, you have to plan. So set up a designated meeting time. Use something maybe like Zoom to make it more accessible. I know everyone is so tired of Zoom. I am too, believe me. Prior to the pandemic, this probably would have been a great alternative. But anyway, set up a time to meet with your team and discuss what topic you guys want to write about, and then also discuss which author should contribute what section of the paper. So if you know you have 5 sections to talk about and you have 5 authors, great, divvy up the work. And this can also be done based on who has the most expertise or who wants to write about the topic, or maybe they just feel comfortable or they want to learn more about that specific topic. That can be a way to break up the work. Another way to have a designated meeting time or to collaborate during the writing process, something that's essential for this, is to establish clear deadlines. So again, plan ahead. If you know your manuscript is due August 1st, and you know it's going to take a while for you guys to edit because it's a huge manuscript and there's so much work that went into this and you want it to be perfect, make a timeline of when you should have certain sections written or when you want to have things edited by, etc. So my example is that if you have a manuscript that you want to have a finalized version submitted by August 1st, set your deadline to have the finished manuscript by July 1st. That will give you a month to edit and revise and make any final changes that you want to the manuscript before you actually submit it to the journal. Using a shared drive or software is one of the biggest and most important things that you can do if you are collaborating with other people during the writing process. In my example, during undergrad, initially we didn't use a shared software and we were emailing versions of the files back and forth to each other, and that got messy so quickly. Everyone was editing on the wrong version of the paper, or the next version didn't get sent to every single person that was editing. So I highly recommend that you use a shared drive, something like Box or Google Drive or something, to keep all the files in one place and avoid these types of miscommunications, because it can be really frustrating. And for me personally. And then my last thing, prior to submission, because this is one manuscript and one body of work, it should sound like one body of work. And so again, if you have a collaboration and you're working with multiple people and multiple people are writing different sections of the paper, and everyone has their own individual writing style and words that they prefer to use, you need to make sure that this manuscript sounds like one person wrote it, not 5. So in order to do this, I recommend that one single author, typically the first author, just because this is their publication, they should read over the entire manuscript, put everything into one style of voice and one style of writing, to make it sound, again, like one person wrote it, because it can be really choppy and blocky if it sounds like 5 people wrote it, right? That doesn't sound good. And then after this one person has edited the manuscript to their liking, The manuscript should then be approved by all authors. And I really want to emphasize this because when you're working with several people whose names are going on one manuscript, it's really
Looks like there was a slight glitch there with
I'll
the presentation. I was typing in the chat there. I was like, is it just me or did it freeze? I'm sure she'll be joining us in just a second to complete her presentation. We have a few folks who've joined us. Welcome, Jaslyn and Nilu. Hopefully she'll be right back. Hopefully it's nothing too serious on her end with her technology. But I think she's pretty close to the end of her presentation. So we'll give her just a minute or two here to get settled. Hopefully she'll be right back.
okay, great, thank you. Okay, so to wrap up this slide, make sure that everyone has approved the final version of the manuscript. That is probably one of the most important things that you will see when you're collaborating with other people in your writing process. So now we're going to discuss the steps in the pre-publishing revision process. So the first step in the pre-publishing revision process generally is to submit your article. So once you've written up your manuscript, you are going to actually submit it to a journal. So maybe the journal has invited you to do this article, or maybe you just want to try to submit your work here. You're going to actually submit it to the journal. In order to do this, you will have to format your manuscript depending on what the journal's requirements are. So different journals have different requirements on what they want regarding font size and style. They may also have a requirement or a limit on your word or page length. And then, like I discussed earlier, some bigger journals may have a limitation on the number of figures that you can actually publish in the work. So you may have to take all of those things into account when deciding what journal to choose and where to submit to. The second general step for the pre-publishing process is to have revisions made by an editorial team. So depending on what journal you are submitting your manuscript to, they will assign you a team of editors, and revisions will be made by the authors based on the editorial team's recommendations. So each journal has their own editorial review board, and again, they will assign you editors to work specifically with you on your paper. And so if you don't know what a reviewer is, this is an anonymous group of people who are going to review your article. And typically these are people who are experts in the topic. So if you're writing about mitochondrial biogenesis, they are probably experts in mitochondria or mitochondrial biogenesis so that they can accurately review your information and your manuscript as a whole. These reviewers are responsible for separately and individually reviewing your manuscript. They will make comments and suggestions or say, you need to change X. And then through the series of revisions, they will decide whether your publication is going to be accepted for publication to the journal. And then that's the last step actually, is to have your article or manuscript accepted or rejected for publication by the editorial team. So now you've written your manuscript, you've submitted it. Now we're in the actual revision process. So let's say you submitted your article, the reviewers have gone through and made comments about what you need to change here and there, and then specifically if they dislike this portion or they want you to add in this, this is the time where you will be doing that. So if you are, again, working with a team of people, you'll need to meet with them to discuss the revisions that are necessary for your manuscript. So during this meeting time, it's really important to decide what revisions you are going to adhere to and actually make those changes in your manuscript, and then how to address reviewer comments. So if a reviewer comes back and says, we really disliked paragraph 3 because XYZ, you need to decide how you're going to address that comment specifically. So during this time, you can also divide the revisions. So this may be based on who has time to revise whatever section it may be, who has the most expertise in that topic. So if I'm an expert at CRISPR-Cas and the reviewer wants us to edit that section, I may say, okay, I'll go ahead and take that section since I am the expert on that topic. Or it may be based on whoever wrote the section. So if you divided your sections of writing earlier in the pre-submission manuscript, you may say, it might be easier for you to edit this section specifically because you wrote it and you're probably the most familiar with the writing and the information that's discussed in this section. So split up the work, especially if you're working with a team of people. My other tip is to designate one person to communicate with the editorial team. This just goes back to, again, it can be a little bit messy if you have 5 people all trying to communicate with one person, but doing it on an individual basis, as opposed to meeting, coming up with a group consensus about these are the things that we need to ask or change or talk to the editorial team about, and designate one person to communicate back and forth with. That will make it so much easier. And it will also make it easier on the editorial team side, because when they talk to all 5 of you at separate times, it may make it confusing for them as well. So make it easy for everyone, pick one person to talk to the editorial team. And then again, use Google Drive, Box, whatever technology works for you to share documents, because again, it can be really confusing if you guys are all emailing version 11 back and I only get version 13 or whatever it may be. It's much easier to have all of your files compacted into one place and location that everyone has access to, so you can all edit the document together, or you can see what changes other people have already made to the document. And then again, I just want to reiterate, make sure that every author is comfortable with the revisions that are made to this. And then lastly, you not only can address the reviewer comments, but you can actually rebut against the reviewer comments. So if reviewer 2 says, I really disliked this part of your table 3, and I really think that you should either delete it or get rid of it or whatever. You and your team, if you decide that you think this information is really important or you have a reason for putting it in there, you can rebut against the reviewers and say, no, I think that we should keep this section because XYZ, and name your reasons. And it's perfectly acceptable to do that. And actually, I would advocate for that, because typically if you wrote it in there in the first place, there's probably a reason why it was in there, right? So it seems a little bit uncomfortable, but be comfortable with your revisions and then stand behind the work that you're doing. So then I wanted to show you guys an example of what it actually looks like if you are in the review process of a journal. So there will typically be some kind of discussion board where you can talk as an author with the editorial team and have comments and conversation about, well, I'm not sure what you meant by this comment, and you can actually address that in a forum. And then you can also see across the top, there's this like checkbox section, and that's essentially to let you track the progress of where you are in the review process. So you can see each of the steps and where you're at and what you have completed. Then you will also notice in this other red box that each reviewer and editor has their own tab. So when each individual reviewer looks at your manuscript, they will come back with a whole section of comments throughout your entire paper. So each tab is dedicated to specific reviewers and editors, and you can see, again, individually, reviewer 1 said XYZ about my paper, reviewer 2 said whatever else. And then this is just another section of, so this is what it looks like inside each of those reviewer or editor columns. So you can see that it prompts them with different questions to address the quality of the manuscript, and it asks them specific questions about the quality, and maybe gives you room to make comments or suggestions on what the authors need to change. So again, each reviewer and editor has their own independent tab because they reviewed the manuscript independently, and they do not discuss until the very end what each of them thinks about the manuscript. So you can see that they're giving a suggestion about what concepts need to be explained in box 3. So this is what it looks like on the author side. And then overall, it asks what revision level. So you can either say major or minor. And this is basically indicating to you how much work you need to put in as an author for the reviewers to accept your manuscript for publication. So this reviewer specifically thought minor revisions needed to be made in order to accept for publication. So now I want to review the pre-publishing revision steps. So step 1, submit your manuscript to a journal. Again, choosing a journal is really important, making sure that you fit the requirements and that you have submitted your manuscript in the correct format, really important. So step 2, the journal will accept your submission and they will assign you a team of editors and reviewers to look at your manuscript. 3 is independent review by each editor and reviewer. So again, they each individually will review your manuscript and make comments or suggestions about what needs to be changed. Then step 4 is the interactive review. So this is where authors can see the comments and suggestions made by the reviewers and editors, and then they can either revise their manuscript, ask questions about the comments and suggestions made by the review team. They can submit any changes that they deem acceptable, or they can rebut against specific requests and give an explanation for why they stand by the work that they previously submitted. The next step is reviewers either accept the version previously submitted or any edits that have been changed by the authors, or they will pose new edits. So they may say, okay, great, you fixed this, but now I want you to look at this, or yeah, you kind of fixed this, okay, but I'd rather have this in there. So if that is the case, where they pose new edits to the manuscript, then the authors will go back and do a secondary interactive review to make additional changes or, again, rebut against whatever the specific comments were. And then the last step is the final decision. So the editorial team at this point will make the decision to accept, your article, and then it'll be published at some point. Yay. So to conclude, I hope that you guys have found this presentation useful, or maybe reviewed some information if you didn't already know some of this stuff. So I hope that this has been a good review of the scientific paper format. If you've already seen that before, if not, great introduction time. And then comparing and contrasting academic writing compared to scientific writing, and hopefully you'll be able to recognize that when you're actually looking at examples of these two writing styles. I hope that you have maybe learned some new strategies for writing and citing in scientific writing specifically. Maybe the literature matrix or Endnote is something you didn't know about before, and maybe you'll consider incorporating that into your new projects. And then I hope maybe you will utilize some of the resources that I suggest, specifically the University Writing Center. I feel like this is a really great resource and it's free, and why not use free resources, right? I hope that you learned a lot about authorship if you didn't already know about this topic, and maybe the different types of authors and how to achieve a certain position on a paper. And then I hope mostly that this was insightful, looking inside the revision process, and I hope that seeing my personal examples has been useful to you. And hopefully you'll use some of these in your own manuscript and when you become a published author one day. So with that, I thank you all for your attention if you're watching live or later on YouTube or wherever this will be posted. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me. This is my preferred method of contact, but you can also reach me by phone or in my office in Volker Hall. So thank you.
Thank you. That was all. So much great information. Just packed full.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. That was awesome.
No,
Just want to open up to some of our folks who are attending to see if there are any comments or questions that they may have for Shannon at this time. I know some folks joined a little bit late, and as she mentioned, we are recording this, so if you need to go back and watch the whole thing, it will be up on our YouTube channel within a day or so. You can also throw stuff in the chat.
yes,
if
you can
that's
also
easier.
message in the chat if that's easier as well.
I see Jaslyn says hello. Did you have a question too, Jaslyn, or just wanted to say hello?
No, I just wanted to say hello. You welcome
Okay.
me.
All right. No problem at all. Saying hello is good as well. All right. Well, if we don't have any questions, I don't want to shut it down. If we do, just real quick, just double checking all the mics. All right. Well, I think
There's one question in the
there is
chat.
one question. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Neil.
Okay, so the
Yes.
question is, when you are rebutting comments from editors, what should you keep in mind? So obviously be respectful. Sometimes the comments may be a little bit harsh from the editors or the review board. And think about it this way, right? So the people reviewing your manuscript are experts in their field, right? So if you, I'll give a personal example from one of my publications. So we were writing a review about mitochondrial biogenesis in cardiovascular disease. You can kind of tell in the comments what their field of expertise might be in. So specifically, we think this person was a geneticist, and they rebutted back against us and said that they wanted to know more about genetics in this specific area of interest. And so really being respectful to them, because it also depends on the scope of what you're talking about. So we rebutted against this reviewer and said, we think this is outside the scope of what we are discussing in this publication. So we said respectfully, we don't think that we should have to include this information, whatever. So number one, be respectful in your response to them, because they may not mean to come off so harshly as they do. And then also think about maybe why they are suggesting this change to you. Is it something that you think may actually improve it? Because you can't just say no to every suggestion if you think your manuscript is perfect, because no manuscript is perfect. So yeah, be respectful and try to maybe think about why they suggested this to you, and if there is a way you can maybe incorporate their comment somewhere else. I think that is probably the two most important things to keep in mind when you are rebutting comments from editors.
All right. Thank you, Nilu. Good question.
Yes, that was a good question.
All right, I'm double checking the chat. There's another one. Is there a point you should give up on a paper after writing a manuscript?
Okay, so do you mean, have you tried to submit the manuscripts to journals and they just rejected you, or you're just having trouble actually writing the manuscript? Okay, so this is a really difficult topic, actually. So if you are having trouble finding a place to publish, or having difficulty with editors, rejecting or saying really negative things about your manuscript, I would suggest either one, try a different journal, because maybe some places are more strict than others and they can have really rigorous editorial teams, and that's fine. There are some people that are just renowned for being really difficult to work with, and that's okay. So I would suggest try publishing somewhere else. And then if you're having a hard time communicating with the editors, I would also maybe recommend asking for input from other people. So if you work in collaboration with other people, or maybe your mentor or other people in your lab, ask them what they think, or ask other people to look at your manuscript and see if they have similar suggestions to whatever the editor is saying. Because it could just be that this editor is being really tough for no reason, so you may be able to go other places. I hope that answers your question.
All right. Excellent.
All
Thanks, Nilu. Good questions as
Yes,
always.
thank you.
All right. Well, we're a little bit over our time, but that's okay. This was still a great presentation, and we had that one technical glitch, but that's okay.
Yes.
It's the world we're in right now. I just
Right,
want
and
to
you know, if we only have one technical difficulty, that's great.
absolutely. But you persevered and did a great job. So thank you, Shannon.
Thank you
Really
for having me.
appreciate it. And we'll get this up on YouTube, our YouTube channel. And so if you need to review it, and others can watch it then. So have a wonderful day, everyone. And we'll talk to y'all later, or see you later, hopefully in the person. All right.
Great.
Have a great day.
Bye.